Hi, I am Allie Camaletti, and you are listening to Snack Leadership. I will be talking about everything leadership, broken down into bite-sized pieces. You will hear what different leadership skills look like in organizations and how they can rise teams up or take them down. I help leaders build resilience and improve performance by bringing awareness to opportunity behaviors in my business. Spark your mindset. I provide leadership and sales coaching, as well as team building and guest speaking. My hope is for you to feel inspiration and to create a spark in your mindset. Today, we are talking about cultural competence. Cultural competence is the ability to understand, communicate, and effectively manage diversity. Lenora Billings-Harris is a diversity and inclusion strategist who specializes in helping organizations make diversity and inclusion a competitive advantage by disrupting bias. She's the author of 2 books, and she is included among the top 100 thought leaders on diversity by the Society of Human Resource Management. Lenora is a past president of the Global Speakers Federation and was recently inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame. I am so excited for you to listen to this interview. Get ready to hear what cultural competence is all about. Hi, Lenora. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to talk about this topic.
It is my thrill to be with you, and you know I'm passionate about this, so I'm just really happy to have another opportunity to not just talk about it, but to have a conversation about it.
Absolutely. So with the definition that we use for cultural competence, I was hoping you could break it down a little bit because we hit on the communication and managing diversity. But if you can expand on that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. You know, I love that you start with the first step of the process is knowledge, because we can't fix what we don't know. And I use a technique, I guess you could call it, called the 4-part cultural compass in order for people to understand cultural competence. And so it's very similar to the way you defined it. The first step is knowledge, where you really need to take responsibility for learning about people different than yourself. Do not expect that other people should pour all of this information into your head. You need to start with some knowledge or developing some knowledge on your own. And today it's so easy with audiobooks and videos and all that kind of thing. Then the second step is understanding. And the way I view it is understanding is where you now venture out to do some things where you will be the other. You're the one who is different. So you learned a little bit about whichever culture it is you're studying. And by the way, culture is very broad. So a culture could be a generational culture as well as gender and ethnicity and race, that kind of thing. And so in the understanding step, that's where maybe if you happen to go to a place of worship on a Sunday, then go someplace else. Or maybe go to a place where they worship not on Sunday, so that you can get that feeling. You're learning something, and you also get the sense of the feeling of being different. Now, that's not the only thing to do, but there are many ways that you can intentionally be the other. Then the third step is what I call acceptance. And that's where the communication piece comes in. Now that, again, you've built some understanding and some knowledge, now you're ready to have what I call candid conversations with people different than you. Because now you probably have some questions. You probably had them before, but you have a little more foundation and you're more ready to have conversations about things that people are, reasonably uncomfortable about. And you can ask those questions. So what you have at that step, what I call those candid conversations. And I've got a whole process for that. And then the last step, because there's 4 parts of the compass, the last step is behavior. Now, of course, all 4 of the steps require behavior, but why I call this one behavior is now you have enough knowledge and understanding and interaction with some people who are different than you, that you are better prepared to be an ally or to be an advocate, to be more comfortable speaking up. The process is simple to describe, as I just did. Doing it is another story. It takes time to do it. And every time you want to learn about a new culture, guess what? You have to start back at number one, the knowledge piece.
It is so beautiful. What really brought this up for you and made you build this four-step process? Like, where'd that passion come from?
Well, I think I was born to do this work because now, when I reflect back, I used to have conversations with my grandfather when he would say something that we now would know is biased, and we'd have these arguments. So that was the seed that was planted, I think, a long time ago. But as it relates specifically to helping people, myself included, to develop our own cultural competence, what I realized was there's a lot of academic information out there. And my clients were wanting to know the how to's. So once you get past the business case for doing this kind of work, then I realized my sweet spot and my gift is taking that information that might seem scary or complex and figuring out a way to make it relatable to everyday people, whether they're everyday people in the workplace or everyday people in the community. So a lot of it is through story. And so when it came to building cultural competence, which is really complex, it's like, well, how can I make this digestible? And that's where this process came from.
I love that it started with your grandfather. My grandfather was a big factor in my life and actually led me to the industry of hospitality forever. And,
Mhm.
they are just such wonderful gems of information and knowledge. And when we can embrace them at a young age, it's really beautiful.
Oh, absolutely. I so get excited when I know little kids have the opportunity to really get to know their grandparents because many don't have that opportunity. So
It's
it
very
makes a
true.
tremendous difference.
Yeah. So tell me about a company, whether you've worked with a company or you've gone in and you really saw this strong cultural competence happening, or you were able to mold that and make it happen. What did that look like?
Well, the first step of the process is you really have to have a top leadership that buys into all of this and not buy in just because it's good for business, but really come from a heart place. And often that happens when they have had something significant happen in their own life. Because let's face it, most of the top leaders are still white men, straight white men. And so when they have had some significant experience happen, then they're more willing to become vulnerable enough to learn more, back to that knowledge piece. And so for the organizations where I have seen this work well, either where I've been working with them directly or others that I have come to know just because I keynoted as opposed to being a consultant, those are the organizations that do what I reflected on earlier. They make it digestible to their teams and to their employees. When you hear cultural competence, people fear that which they do not know.
Yeah.
And so when you hear that term, when you're able as a leader to say, now this is what it means for us, this is, and then each leader at every level is able to articulate it in a way that their team members realize, oh, that means I do or don't say certain things, but not just being politically correct. It's, much more than that. But when those leaders can learn how to illustrate inclusive behaviors, because that's what it boils down to, that's that behavior piece, when they're able to illustrate and role model for others inclusive behaviors, then it eventually becomes part of their culture. And I think one of the things that happens when it works well is that leaders look at this whole process of cultural competence as aspirational. They know you're not totally ever going to get there because there's always more to learn. So when they look at it that way, then people are less concerned about making a mistake. People are always afraid to make a mistake, especially in the corporate world, but they fear it a bit less because they know we're always on that growth mindset, that learning journey.
I come from a real place of values, and that's important to me as a human. And companies that I work with often are really just starting to bring them in. And so, if you were to give advice on what that actual word would be, what do you think is the best word for? Is it cultural competence? Is it inclusion that is digestible if they were to put it in company values?
Company values are challenging to write, just as the mission statement is. I recently have gone through this process for a nonprofit that I'm involved with, and the values need to be written in a way that, again, anybody reading it will get it immediately. And
Exactly.
so I think from a cultural competence perspective, when the organization's values talk about not just inclusion, but also belonging, because those are two
Yes.
different things. But when they talk about inclusion, it's inclusion of all of their team members, inclusion of their customers or clients. And they also talk about belonging, which really means you are part of the team and we value and respect you. Not just want to have you on the team, but we want to have your voice. We want you to be seen. We want you to be heard. We want you to feel that you belong. When they can articulate their values somewhat like that, then people really get it. And these days, folks that are joining organizations are researching them well before they ever show up virtually or in person for an interview. And these days, folks are looking for what the company's values are. So if they're still just pontificating lofty kinds of things that people can't relate to, then it isn't going to work very well.
It's so true. And I remember going back into the workforce before starting this business, and that was the first thing I looked at was values. And that was really important to me that those aligned for it to be a good fit. Now, I love that you say belonging too, because I do a lot of resilience work, and belonging is such a big piece of that work and something that I strive for with my own daughter and in my life and how I communicate. So, thank you. Now, let's talk about the companies that maybe you've encountered that really struggle with cultural competence. Like, can we break it down so people understand and maybe are like, oh, whoa, maybe that's us and we need to look at this?
It's a great question to ask right now, given all of the disruption that our country is going through and that corporations have been feeling and organizations in every regard. Starting in 2020 and then also in 2021, many organizations started talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and now some are adding on B for belonging. They started talking about it in a way they never had before. So even though they'd always already had been doing some things, it was more of a check off the box kind of thing. They knew that they had to be more authentic. And so the first part of that work, which is developing your DEI strategy and developing the action plans below that strategy, the first part of that work for organizations that I've been working with, they have that done. It's been done really well. It's really wordsmithed and all of that. The next step is actually doing the work. And that's where people are wrestling with how to do this, because what I'm finding is happening is just like in years past, where companies are gung ho on this, until there's some other kind of disruption, then it's like, well, diversity, inclusion, understanding more about different people, we have to put that on the back burner. They're not seeing it as this should be the front light, let alone somewhere in the mix. It needs to be the front light, because if you do not have the competence to interact with people different than you, then you are going to continue to lose best talent and not be able to hire the best talent because of what we just talked about. People are checking you out before you ever talk to them the first time. So those organizations that are not doing well are the ones that are now at the hard part. They've dealt with the low-hanging fruit, like giving money to different social community organizations, broadening their diversity talent search in the recruiting part. But the hard part is working with the people already with you, not just leaders, but everybody. The hard part is ingraining the importance of cultural competence among everyone. And what I'm finding is that the whole concept of bias, which I've been living and breathing for about the last 8 years now, most of my work focuses on that, most of my workshops and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That whole concept of bias is still scary to people. And so even though they may learn, here's some things you can do to disrupt your own biases, many are not willing to do the work because it means they have to be vulnerable. They have to reach out to some other folks to say, most of my biases I know are unconscious. So I need you to point that out to me. Don't throw me under the bus. But if I do or say something that lands on you the way you hear it as bias or inappropriate and whatever that might be, then I need you to let me know that, because I can't change what I don't know. That's what many people are not yet willing to do. And if they're not yet willing to do that part, then we can only go so far.
So important. I mean, really, you can apply that to everything, really.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's what, gets right back to that communication piece and having candid conversations with people.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's vulnerability, it's transparency.
Mm-hmm.
So, talk to me about, who is your favorite leadership mentor?
Well, I have several that come to mind. One is a woman who unfortunately is no longer with us. We lost her to cancer last year, and her name was Chris Clark Epstein. And she was a leader in many different capacities. I got to know her quite well over the last several years. And the reason she comes to mind is because she spoke directly, not rudely, but directly. And she was willing to take risks because it was the right thing to do. So she came to my mind immediately when you asked me that question. So to give you an example, she was a professional speaker and was president of the National Speakers Association. And at that time, the presidents could identify the people that would be on the main stage at our biggest convention. And she chose, this was many years ago, well, 2001. So in some ways, it's not that many years ago. To others, it might be a long time. But back in 2001, she invited a gay men's choir to sing. And the organization back then was not that open to that kind of thing. But she knew it was the right thing to do. And that began conversations that helped people recognize that the organization needed to become more inclusive. So I just love her so much for that.
Beautiful. How about a quote that you really feel embodies cultural competence?
On one of my trips to South Africa, I learned a proverb that to me totally embraces not only what cultural competency is, but why it's important. And that proverb is Ubuntu. It's a Zulu proverb. So the word is Ubuntu. Translated, though, it means I am because we are. We are because I am. And it's the foundation of all of my work. It seems to me to describe I can be better at being who I am when I value and respect you, and you have the ability to reach your highest potential as well. And we have to do that together.
One of the things when I started researching you, I saw that on your website, and I knew the universe works in mysterious ways for me. Sometimes I'm like, yep, this is meant to be, because I had an article I used to use like years ago with the people that I would coach on sales. And it came from a relationship building piece. And it was one of the favorite articles that I would share with them to have them do as homework.
Well, and when people Google it, they usually see the software first, but the software is shareware, and it is based on the principles of Ubuntu.
Yeah, this was the principles.
Mm-hmm.
So I always like to close with, what is your favorite snack?
My favorite snack, so I usually have one of these every night, and that is York peppermint patties, or any chocolate with mint on the inside. And so I keep the little tiny, you can get little tiny ones now. So I keep them in the freezer. And then that way I'll only take one or two of the little tiny ones. And I love it because it's got the sweetness on the outside. And then there's this burst of richness from the peppermint in my mouth. And I kind of think of myself that way.
I would describe you that way. Lenora, you are such a wealth of information, and I'm so grateful for our time today. I really cannot thank you enough.
It has been an absolute honor and a privilege to be with you.
Thank you for tuning in to Snack Leadership. I hope you felt inspiration, motivation, and felt your mindset spark. Snack Leadership is recorded and produced by myself, Ali Camilletti, and music by Shireen Amini.